On a beautiful afternoon, the man returned home from work, as usual. At that moment, his wife was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. As he entered and greeted her, she suddenly turned around and plunged a fruit knife into his stomach. Her eyes were vacant, devoid of any emotion. After committing the act, she calmly lay down on the bed and fell asleep. The couple had always loved each other. So why did the wife suddenly kill her husband? Could there be a deeper conspiracy behind this murder? The main character is a woman named Emily. 4 years ago, her husband was jailed for financial crimes, leading her to suffer from severe depression. Although he has now been released, her condition has not improved. The next day, Emily went to work as usual, but her mood fell to its lowest point. After starting the car, she stepped on the gas and drove straight into the wall. The male lead, Banks, is a psychologist. After learning about Emily's condition, he volunteered to be her primary doctor. Fortunately, Emily only suffered minor injuries to her forehead, and nothing else was seriously wrong. However, her depression had reached the point of suicidal tendencies. Banks advised her to be hospitalized for observation for a period of time, but Emily firmly refused. She believed that her husband had just been released from prison, so she had to be by his side, and what happened today was just an accident. She promised not to let a similar situation happen again. After consulting with the family, Banks agreed to discharge her, but required her to see him for a follow-up within a week. He also prescribed some common antidepressants. A few days later, Emily came for a follow-up appointment as scheduled. Banks noticed that her symptoms could not have appeared in just 1 or 2 days, so he wanted to know if she had been treated by any doctors before. Emily said that 4 years ago, when she was still in Connecticut, she was treated by Dr. Victoria for 9 months, but after moving here, she no longer went for checkups. Realizing that communication between doctors could help improve treatment effectiveness, Banks decided to meet with Dr. Victoria to learn more about the causes of Emily's illness. Dr. Victoria said that Emily had not received recognition from her father since childhood. When she grew up, she finally found someone she loved, but he was unfortunately imprisoned. Not only that, their house and all their assets were confiscated. A series of shocks made Emily unable to bear it, and finally, she suffered from depression. Victoria had previously prescribed some antidepressants for her, but the effect was very limited. Perhaps Emily should try some new drugs, such as Ablixa. At least it could help patients regain confidence. That evening, Emily and her husband were invited to a party. Initially, her husband did not want to take her because people with depression find it difficult to adapt to crowded places. But Emily wanted to try. She needed to learn how to overcome psychological barriers. At the beginning of the party, Emily was still able to communicate normally with everyone. But after a while, she began to feel extremely uncomfortable, so she went to the bar to order a soda. A colleague saw her strangeness and shared her story. Last year, she discovered she had a tumor, which caused her mood to plummet. Under the advice of her doctor, she started using an antidepressant called Ablixa, which was very effective in helping her escape that dark period. But at this time, Emily was no longer in the mood to chat. After finding her husband, she hurriedly left the place. The next day, while waiting for the subway, Emily had another episode. She actually took steps towards the tracks, but fortunately, a police officer on duty pulled her back in time. Emily immediately broke out in a cold sweat because she couldn't control this suicidal behavior and the frequency was increasing. She hurriedly went to see Banks and told him about her condition. Her husband had started working again, and she was trying to keep living, so she didn't want to be bothered by this disease. If common drugs didn't work, she wanted to switch to a new drug. Her colleague had said that Ablixa was very helpful in relieving depression, and it was often advertised on TV, so maybe it could help her. This was not a big problem, and Banks agreed, so he prescribed Ablixa for Emily. That evening, a pharmaceutical company invited 3 psychologists to dinner. The company was researching a new antidepressant and needed professional doctors to be consultants. Because the other 2 didn't have time, Banks took the job. Moreover, the remuneration was very generous, up to $50,000 a year. Perhaps because she was using the new drug, Emily's spirit became very good during that time. She was no longer afraid of her surroundings and could communicate normally with everyone. Martin thought their life had returned to normal, until one night, he was suddenly awakened by loud music. When he went out, he only saw Emily playing music and preparing breakfast. But it was midnight. Were there guests coming to the house? But Emily didn't see Martin at all. After observing more closely, he discovered that his wife was sleepwalking. She had never shown this behavior before. The next morning, Martin immediately took her to see Banks. He said that sleepwalking was one of the side effects of Oblixa. Therefore, Martin wanted to switch to another drug. However, Emily refused. Every day at 3 p.m., her head felt like it was covered by a layer of poisonous fog that prevented her from moving. Since using Oblixa, that feeling had completely disappeared. If she had to go back to the way she was, she would rather change doctors. Banks thought for a moment and said there was still a solution. He prescribed some sleepwalking medication for Emily to support Oblixa, both reducing depression and preventing sleepwalking. Thinking that her condition was under control, he was unprepared for what happened next. The next afternoon, Emily's illness relapsed. She took the subway and forgot to get off at her stop. In previous episodes, Emily didn't dare to go anywhere. After taking the medicine, she went to bed and slept. In the evening, Martin returned home after a busy day. As soon as he entered the door, he saw the gift his wife had left on the sofa. Recently, Emily had been trying to cultivate their relationship. Hearing the sound of cutting vegetables in the kitchen, he hurriedly stepped in and said hello. But unexpectedly, at this moment, Emily turned around and stabbed a fruit knife into his stomach. It turned out that she was sleepwalking again. But this time, it was not just cooking. She stabbed her husband repeatedly until he fell into a pool of blood, then returned to bed and continued sleeping. The next day, the police arrived at the scene. Emily had no idea what had happened. She just woke up and saw her husband lying on the floor in a pool of blood. She was very panicked and called the police immediately. The police inspected the scene. The surveillance camera did not record anyone else coming to the house, and only Emily's fingerprints were in the area. In addition, her feet were covered in blood, so it was very likely that she was the perpetrator. Banks received the notification and rushed over. Emily did not hire a lawyer and only kept mentioning Banks' name. Fully regain her freedom. Banks, however, had one final move left to play. He reminded Emily that while she was legally safe from being retried for her husband's murder, she was still under court-mandated psychiatric supervision. Any signs of instability could result in her being institutionalized again indefinitely. Emily smirked, thinking she had won, but Banks had already planned his next step. He calmly informed her that, as her psychiatrist, he had the authority to declare her mentally unfit at any time. If she tried to escape his grasp or defy his recommendations, she would find herself locked away in the mental hospital for good. This time, with no hope of release. Realizing she was trapped, Emily's confidence wavered. She had played a long and careful game, manipulating everyone around her, but now she was at the mercy of the one person she had underestimated. "You see, Emily," Banks said with a cold smile, "you might have outplayed the legal system, but you didn't outplay me." With no way out, Emily was left with only two choices: comply with Banks's terms or risk losing her freedom forever. And for the first time in her life, she had no control over what happened next. The story ended with Emily walking out of Banks' office, a forced smile on her lips, knowing she was no longer in charge of her own fate.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Movie Story for more amazing movie recaps. Let us know in the comments which movie you'd like us to cover next. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.